Thank you for joining us at the third annual Indo-Pacific Strategy Forum. My name is Carlo Dade. I am the director of the Center for Trade and now Trade Infrastructure at the Canada West Foundation based in Calgary. Obviously, I'm not Ken Moriyasu or Mairead Lavery, so I think that was a pretty easy guess. I hope it was an easy guess on folks' part. It's my pleasure to introduce an innovation this year at the Strategy Forum. We wanted to change things up, something that's new for us, but is becoming fairly standard at these sorts of events, and that's to have interviews. Rather than just a standard keynote, instead do an interview. And we were very fortunate to be joined by Ken Moriyasu, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Ken is the Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Nikkei. I'm sure that doesn't need an explanation in this room, but we are indeed honored and privileged that he would fly up from Washington to join us. Also, our keynote, EDC. EDC has been a great partner, not just of Canada West Foundation, stepping up to sponsor this event, but they've been a key partner for businesses in Western Canada and for those of us on the trade front in Western Canada. We enjoy working with the feds. Yes, we said that, it's coming from the West, but we really, really love working with EDC. They've been a strong presence throughout the West, always showing up. Mairead's with us 2 or 3 times a year, just at CWF, so it is indeed a pleasure to have her here and to have EDC working with us on this conference. With that, I'll turn it over to Ken, and you've got about half an hour. He'll take questions from the audience at the end of the interview. Thank you, and enjoy the interview.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It is my great pleasure to host this event with Mairead Lavery. Ms. Lavery has been the president and CEO of Export Development Canada since 2019, and she is the first woman to serve this role in the organization's 75-plus year history. Before that, she was vice president and Bombardier. She's a native of Northern Ireland, but a Canadian citizen since 2015. Right. So since the EDC's mission is to help Canadian companies, big and small, navigate the tumultuous world outside Canada's borders, it will be interesting to hear from Mairead about how she sees the landscape, primarily of the Indo-Pacific. So in one of the morning sessions, there was a question about how Japan sees Canada. So I just wanted to offer my 2 cents. I've been the Washington correspondent for just 1 month. Before that, I was in Tokyo covering the US ambassador to Japan, Mr. Rahm Emanuel, a very interesting figure. Rahm always says that we're really at an inflection point where investment decisions until now had been guided by cost and efficiency. And of course, China was the champion of cost and efficiency. But now Rahm Emanuel says the northern star of these decision-making, these decisions will be stability, sustainability, and predictability. And that if China offers a very cheap option initially, considering the risks of sanctions, for instance, or geopolitical turmoil, those costs might end up being more in the long run. So there's a new metric of measuring investment partners. And from Japan's perspective, Canada, Australia, and the US itself are going to be very important in the decisions going forward. And I hear that you've just come back from a trip to Japan. So I thought we'd start with your impressions. And I have a feeling that there was enthusiasm on the Japanese side about teaming with Canada.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ken, and thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. Delighted to be here. Unfortunately, with 30 minutes, we've got a lot to cover because it's a big region and lots to talk about. I was part of the Team Canada trade mission. I took the opportunity to go see some companies to also sort of widen the perspective. And without a doubt, the imperative for Japan to trade with Canada was incredible. Trade and investment, I should say. And certainly we heard a very consistent Japanese story about the opportunities between our two countries, whether that was by government officials, large companies, and or business associations. So very positive about what Canada has to offer at this point in time. I think it really comes from a mindset in Japan that national security and food security are top of the agenda. And when you put that at the top of the agenda, you look at countries like Canada, where we have a food sufficiency ratio of over 100%. The same thing for energy, which of course links to national security. So without a doubt, there were lots of opportunities, and I'm very excited by the opportunity to push Japan further. We make about $18 billion of exports per year to Japan. That was our 2022 numbers, and it's growing fast. So I think there's lots of opportunities for Canadian companies to really step into what Japan needs at this point in time.
When we talk about food security, I think something that's not really noticed in the Western world is that because of our dietary habits, Japan is in a direct zero-sum competition with China and South Korea over the same ingredients, like soybeans. Like, because we eat so much tofu, if China has access to soybeans, that's a zero-sum direct impact on Japan. So that's interesting. Food and national security, and also energy, I believe. Rahm Emanuel always says that from Alaska to Japan, one of the merits is that there are no choke points. It's a direct straight line. So that's why it's a potential market for LNG. How about energy ties with Japan?
Yeah, that was part of the conversation as well. Lots of discussion around LNG and LPG, both different sources, and then a very fast-growing conversation around hydrogen. And what is the possibility for hydrogen, and then critical minerals, because if you look at Japanese industry and what it will need to be successful in a low-carbon world, critical minerals come into play again as well. So there were certainly discussions around all of those topics and what Canada could provide.
What can Canada provide?
Well, today Canada is already providing LPG, so liquid petroleum gas, and lots of interest then in the new LNG facility in British Columbia and what that will mean. I think there's lots of interest as well, both by Japan and South Korea, which starts a different debate going on about tying up access to hydrogen resources in Canada. So really it's a case of as much as you can, as fast as you can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's talk about Canada's trade performance. I've been hearing that one of the reasons that Canada is interested in the Indo-Pacific is that its trade performance over the past few years has not been the best, and it has been struggling to rebound from the COVID recession. What can you tell us about Canada's trade performance?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken. And, you know, it's a bit longer than just the COVID performance. It really, you know, since 2000, we had about a 4% share of global exports. That's down to 2.3% now. It has come back since the pandemic, but nowhere close to the levels that we had before. So when you reflect on Canada's trade performance, it's probably linked to two primary factors. One was NAFTA, which gave Canada's trade a real boost when NAFTA came into play. And the second thing is we are seeing competitors around the world, and certainly China being a large competitor to the global export market, that have really bumped Canada. We're now sitting at 26 out of 32 OECD countries. So not a great place for Canada to be in a country that calls itself a trading nation. So something needs to be different going forward if we're to continue having the prosperous economy that we have that's based on trade.
That's very interesting. When you say NAFTA, of course, we think about Mr. Trump and the prospect that he might come back into office. So that has to be a consideration. And also China. When we talk about Indo-Pacific, I think the two questions are how do we deal with China, and how do we deal with America? So let me start from the US standpoint first. How does Canada see the current opportunities in the US? You could say that under President Biden, there have been efforts to strengthen the economic fundamentals of the US with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. How are these helping America become an attractive market? But also, how much do you have to take into account the 2024 presidential election and the risks that might accompany that?
So full declaration, I don't have a crystal ball, right? So I have no idea what's going to happen in the US election. But let me talk a little bit about the exporters' perspective. So, you know, I think not just Canada, but many countries around the world had to react to the acts that the US have taken. You know, and on one hand, you could say they're incredibly environmentally focused acts. But on the other hand, you could also look at them as acts of protectionism because they do center manufacturing, production, and a lot of activities in the US. So Canada's sitting with a CUSMA agreement. NAFTA was old, but CUSMA agreement actually sets Canada up very well. We always have been this certainly supplier of choice into the US. 77% of Canadian exports, $600 billion a year, go to the US. So it is our largest trading partner. So it sets Canada up very well to be able to access some of those opportunities. But let's be honest, those opportunities are going to have to be accessed in a different way. They are going to need investment in the US. They're going to look to perhaps different supply chains. And many other countries are looking to access this wave of activity that's going through the US. So I'd say it's a coin. It's got two sides. It can be extremely positive and equally extremely challenging because the competition is absolutely there. Before I leave this sort of Inflation Reduction Act and huge drive for renewable energy, green activities in the US, I think we also have to reflect on the economic conditions today. So what we're also seeing in the US is it's not all roses in the garden either. Many companies, particularly in the wind sector, and offshore wind was a huge part of the Biden plan, really struggling with high interest rates, challenges in supply chains. We've seen a number of promoters of wind projects actually cease trading in the US. So whilst there's a real drive in this direction, it's not as easy to actually get the permitting, et cetera, to get these projects up and running and to get them up and running in a cost-efficient manner as perhaps it was thought that it was going to be. Then you add in the second part of your question, which is the US election. I think everyone's monitoring what will happen in the US election. Interestingly, for Canada, it's one of two important elections, notwithstanding we could have our own at any time and will have before 2025. But Mexico also has an election in 2024. So here we go again, our biggest trading relationships, our biggest free trade agreement of which we're part, CUSMA, there's elections in all three countries in the short term. So that puts a lot of uncertainty on the table for exporters in particular as they think of how to navigate that. We will also see shortly the first 6-year first renewal of the CUSMA agreement. So again, when you have free trade agreements, they give a lot of certainty to exporters and they give a lot of certainty on the rules of trade. But we're going into a period where we'll see CUSMA have to go through its first review, its first formal review. And I think that's a really interesting period. So elections, CUSMA review, just the state of the economy, there's a lot for exporters to think about. We've had elections with the US before. We've had elections with Mr. Trump on the ticket before. I think what we've always seen in Canada is the strength of the bilateral ties, the strength of trade that exists today. So we have, and our automotive sector is the one we always quote, just the amount of backwards and forwards across our border. But trade is done between people. Trade is done between companies. And trade isn't really done by governments. So trade is done B2C, B2B, not really G2G. So what became important at the last election was the 38 states of the United States where Canada is their largest importer. The goods come from Canada. The trade is so prevalent between our two countries that won't necessarily disappear and did not disappear in previous elections either. Does it sometimes take a different form? Yes. Does it sometimes suffer a shock? Yes. But it's so established, that's what we have to focus on as Canadians in ensuring that that doesn't go away and that we remain the preferred choice partner and supplier for many of the US states. So continuing to work at company level, at state level, is what really remains important for Canadian trade.
If I can just add what I observe in Washington, there is, especially on Congress, there's a new focus on Canada and Australia. This is related to the subsidies, the $7,500 subsidy available for electric vehicles in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the IRA. And it only goes to cars manufactured with critical minerals from domestic American suppliers or FTA partners, Canada and Australia primarily. And the latest argument is if we should bring Indonesia into this. The White House National Security Council, because of its geopolitical strategy, wants to bring Indonesia in as part of the new non-China supply chain. But people in Congress are saying that and they want to sign a limited FTA with Indonesia so that Indonesia could be eligible for these subsidies. But the Congress is saying the mining industry in Indonesia is dominated by Chinese money, so that the subsidies should be restricted to US domestic producers and the FTA partners. So there's a tug of war, I think, there. So that'll be interesting to watch. Let's talk about the other player in the Indo-Pacific, which is China. When Canada looks at the Indo-Pacific as an opportunity, how much is China a part of that? Is it business as usual? Does China continue to be the main focus of the Indo-Pacific, or is it everybody else? How do you see that?
So always a really interesting question when we ask it about China. Let me start by saying it still remains our second largest trading partner in country terms for Canada. So, $28 billion of exports per year going to China, and that's up 17% over the year before. So our exporters are saying that there is business to be done in China and are continuing to export in China. We certainly at EDC remain open and in support of their trade and investment in China. It's just such a consumer powerhouse, and of course, has such needs for agriculture, for clean technology, for many of the commodities that Canada provides. So we continue to see strong trade with China, and I think our companies are going to continue to want to trade with China because the consumer is there. That doesn't mean we don't have to be aware of geopolitics and help our exporters understand how they can manage the risks associated with that. And something like the CHIPS Act is a good example of how a third country can become involved in something that's between the two global superpowers. I think I can always take some comfort and learning from some of the ASEAN countries and the countries in the Indo-Pacific who indicate that they're not going to make the choice. They're actually going to continue trade and investment with the US and with China and chart that path. It doesn't mean that it's an easy path, but they chart that path. Now, as the head of an export credit agency, I don't set government policy. We're just here to help our exporters as they continue on their journey. So what we need to do is make sure that they understand the risks, that they continue to monitor the trends. But again, like I said in the US, when you're trading with China, it becomes trading with another company, trading with a partner, trading with a city, trading not usually a province, but more cities. So again, trade is done at these levels that isn't at the big, country statement level. And you find very different relationships when you get down to that. So I think China will be an important place that exporters want to continue to grow. At EDC, our focus is more on how do we diversify them from the US. And that doesn't mean that we don't want exporters to continue to be very successful supplying the US. It's a huge market. Why wouldn't we want to be the supplier of choice to the US? But with 77% of our exporters going to one market, and a market that today is less stable than it has been in the past, we want to see them thinking of more countries. We want to see them open up markets in the Indo-Pacific for lots of different reasons. These are the fastest growing markets. Oh, sorry, there's someone calling me to ask if I've got the right answer. Or maybe telling me I don't have the right answer. But these are the fastest growing markets. They have the demographics. Middle class is growing there. What we have in Canada really meets the needs of these countries. So we've got to grow the pie for Canada and certainly grow it in the rest of the Indo-Pacific markets. So we've got to get Canadian exporters thinking about Indonesia, thinking more about Australia, thinking about how they can use other markets to actually help them access these consumers who are going to be the consumers of the future.
Right. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions after my last question. So if you could start lining up in front of the microphone if you have questions. My last question is the EDC has opened offices in Jakarta and Seoul. Could you tell us why the choice of Indonesia and South Korea, and what the role of these offices are?
Yeah, thanks for that. So maybe I should start by saying it's in addition to our offices in Mumbai, Delhi, Shanghai, Beijing, Sydney, and Singapore. So really wanting to expand our footprint to be there for exporters, because the one thing you have to be is boots on the ground. Like, you have to be in these markets to understand the opportunities, to understand how business is done. So we needed to be there. South Korea, an easy example, we've had a free trade agreement in effect since 2015 with the South Korean market. To your earlier question, we're seeing lots of interest in South Korea in Canadian energy, in Canadian critical minerals. South Korean companies are investing in Canada. We have the examples, of course, from the EV battery supply chain. So lots more bilateral trade and investment. So why wouldn't we want to be in that market and actually try and access it? Indonesia, fastest growing market. We've indicated in 2021, there's work to have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, a CEPA agreement with Indonesia. And again, significant opportunities for infrastructure, for clean technology, for energy, and agri-food. So many of the things that we already export to these countries, including minerals and fertilizer, et cetera, we can actually do more of at this point in time. So again, why wouldn't you want to be there? But just in case you think we forgot about Japan, Ken, just in case, next year we would like to open up 3 new offices, which include Tokyo, Manila, and Ho Chi Minh for Vietnam. Wow. So 3 more offices to get the brand Canada out there.
Good, that's my headline tomorrow. All right, 2 questions each. This side, please.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Sandin with Intrinsic Innovations, and I'm thinking with Canada becoming more of a knowledge-based economy, at least I hope so, focusing on fields where we can become leaders like artificial intelligence, quantum computing. The US is proposing policy to restrict American investment in foreign companies that do business in those types of industry. So how do we as Canadians continue to grow our desire to diversify our export partners when our key trade partner is really being protective of development of their knowledge-based economy, and especially 2 areas where Canada could become a global leader?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think the question says it's in itself, where you are giving examples where our largest trading partner may be trying to protect their own industry. So we've got lots of work to do to find other trading partners and partners that we want to work with. I start with, particularly when you're in the knowledge-based sector, I have a very strong belief, strongly held, that we need to continue doing a few things. One, we need to continue investing in the engineering and mathematical talent and our universities that actually creates the possibility to be a world leader in quantum, to be a world leader in AI. Without that, we're going nowhere. So let's start there. The second thing is we need our own policies, et cetera, to ensure that our companies have the chance to grow and to scale within Canada. I would like to see that there was a stronger capital market in Canada or private equity and venture that would encourage those companies to stay Canadian. So that's the second thing I'd like, is for them to stay Canadian. And then I think the third thing is that Canadian companies are going to have to look at where they should be partnering with and who they should be partnering with to perhaps access other markets. And there's lots of opportunity. So again, you know, it is an Indo-Pacific conference. So like when I see the countries that are doing the most innovation, and if I was to dumb it down to a digital agenda, it's not North America, it's in Asia. And that's why I fundamentally believe our companies, and particularly our innovative companies that are in advanced manufacturing, that are in quantum and are in some of these industries, need to be looking further afield.
Right. Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Said. When I hear the conversation in the morning and the policy of EDC, I feel kind of like the paradox between the action of the government and the policy that the EDC is taking. Canada, they joined Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank in 2018, and then after that, there was a lot of conversation and debate about the national security, that why the Canadian government, they joined the AIIB, and even not long time ago, a few months ago, Mr. Bob Piquet, the executive of the Canada in the bank, he resigned from his position. And then according to his interview, he said, Canada is not gaining anything in Asia Pacific and we should not join. So if Canada is not active in Asia Pacific and always they claim China that the Communist Party, they take the lead of the bank and they take the lead of the investment in Asia, and then they come back to their home, how they want to involve in the region, because the biggest importer in the world is China. And for example, for the nickel from Canada, the Canada, they banned a lot of investment from China because of the national security. And the biggest buyer of the nickel is China. So how do you want to solve this kind of the paradox? Because I cannot see why the China, they have to buy the Canadian product, because Canada, they put a lot of restriction on Chinese investment because of the national security. But from the other side, they said, we want to export our products to your country. So thank you so much.
I'll take a few questions. Next one, please.
Hi, I really did appreciate your perspectives because this morning we didn't really hear very much about the very real exports that currently place a huge value proposition on our trade ties with the Indo-Pacific. So, of course, I'm from Alberta because I perked up when I heard natural gas exports and propane exports, and of course, ammonia exports, specifically clean ammonia exports, really do pose a massive economic opportunity for Western Canada. But it's very difficult and very it sort of will beat us down in Alberta because it doesn't always seem like the rest of the rooms in the country understand this massive opportunity for the rest of us, and we will all benefit from these increased trade ties. Could you reiterate possibly for the Alberta crowd here, just how important those energy exports are for Western Canada to Japan and South Korea, and specifically like what kind of quantity and magnitude are we talking here? Because in Alberta, we know how massive it is, but by the conversation that was happening this morning, where we were only talking about AI and data or critical minerals, which aren't really a proven export yet, I didn't hear what is real right now, and that's what's really important to Western Canada.
And last question from Jeff.
Thanks a lot, Ken. And I guess I'll just want to jump in and say if it's good for Western Canada, it's of course good for Canada as a whole. Having just joined the Canada West Foundation, that's one of the key lines, so I wanted to reiterate that, but that's not the genesis of my question. So I wanted to pick up on two things you said and tie them together to ask a slightly specific question, particularly for anyone here who's involved with working with small businesses or medium-sized businesses in entering into the Indo-Pacific market. So we can applaud EDC's recognition that to have success in market, you need to have a physical presence in market, different business norms, the importance of relations, et cetera. Thank you. I'm glad you covered that. But you also pointed out that the vast majority of our trade is with the United States. So if you're a Canadian company and your account receivables are by and large coming from the United States, that's where a lot of your investment has been targeted towards. How can we get a Canadian company that either doesn't have the resources or is apprehensive about making the resources investments to have a physical in-market presence so they can better understand the different norms, business environment, and culture to help them build those relationships? Because we all know here that to have success in Asia, you can't just show up. You need to, you need to be regularly engaging. So what advice would you have for Canadian companies that don't have those resources? How can they get those benefits to open up those relationships?
So Ken, I have 2 hours to answer these questions.
You can
No?
choose which ones you want to answer. You can ignore the ones you don't want to answer.
I thought Ken was going to be the hard interviewer here today. So let me start with the Canada Infrastructure Investment Bank. Look, I think you have to zoom out from just this specific one enterprise. There's a lot of discussion and debate going on about the role of multilateral development banks today around the world. And many countries are asking whether their contributions to MDBs are actually driving for them what they want for their country. So notwithstanding one specific example, I think there's a part of a bigger reassessment of how countries are supporting. And of course, I can't not be on this panel today and not talk about COP28, where we're seeing new entities being formed, where there's a lot of discussion about private sector mobilization. So I think many countries are reevaluating how they're actually supporting some of the countries, some other countries, and how they want to do development and how they actually want to do that around the world. So lots going on in that space. Yes, there is lots of opportunities. Let me start with, some people say ammonia, some people say hydrogen. Hydrogen's just something that hasn't been converted to how to transit it yet, which then leads to the whole discussion on ammonia. So lots of opportunities. It is being put out there as the fuel of the future, not just a transition fuel. Lots of discussion as well about nuclear, and we saw that most recently with a conference in Paris on nuclear energy. So I think there's a lot of recognition, and I want to be very clear about that fossil fuel sources will need to reduce production over time. And we can look at many sources that indicate that. And what's the replacement? So there's lots of opportunity for new fuels of the future. So you just have to take account of what are our energy exports today and know that over time, those will need to be replaced as part of an energy transition, either with renewable energy in situ or in other forms of energy that can be transported around the world. So, energy is Canada's largest export today in the form of oil and in some LNG. And certainly we see not just, we talked about Japan and South Korea and other countries that don't have energy sufficiency, but the Russia-Ukraine war highlighted that for Europe as well. So there not only is there a pivot to different forms of energy from a climate environment perspective, but there's an actual energy national security argument for many countries around the world today. So if you're certainly talking about LNG and ammonia, there are lots of opportunities. And as our biggest export, that will have to convert over time as we all work towards Paris 1.5 degrees. So, of course, I know that Alberta is actually the largest province with renewable energy in Canada, which maybe not a lot of you knew. Sorry, notwithstanding hydro, because hydro, I was eliminating that. But in terms of actually wind power, Alberta has the most across Canada. So yes, lots of opportunities there. Western Canada, okay, working with small, medium-sized, what advice would I have for them? Well, first off, if it's accounts receivable, you went there, so I have to, of course, plug my accounts receivable credit insurance, which actually makes sure that small, medium-sized companies get paid no matter where it is around the world. Look, I think we all have to be really realistic about our companies, notwithstanding that Canada is made up of more small and medium-sized companies in our trade ecosystem. we have to recognize it's going to be easier for large companies to set up a presence in markets around the world, to access global supply chains. So we have to be supporters of our large companies and help them get into to opportunities, into projects, into trade with other countries. Then we have to get, and at EDC, we're very focused on how do we grow our medium-sized companies. We're really good in Canada at starting up companies, but we're really bad at having the ecosystem to actually scale them up. And that's what we need to do so that those companies are actually big enough to trade when they go into those countries. And maybe a couple of then things that I would say, for small companies, it's about building their capability and their capacity. It's about getting them into supply chains here in Canada. It's about getting them into supply chains that are going global. It's about building up their ability to perhaps partner. They may not be able to go into these countries directly themselves, but we cannot think about going to trade with Indo-Pacific as a model of just going in and building a factory in a country. It's not like that. It's license arrangements, it's joint ventures, it's partnerships, it's distributor opportunities. It's e-commerce at its most basic level. So e-commerce is one of the ways where small companies actually can access markets. But the challenge that they face is the demand is so significant, they can't actually build the inventory that's needed. So again, we've got to keep investing in these companies in Canada so that they build the capability and the capacity to actually be able to trade. Exporting is not for the faint-hearted, and it takes a lot of expertise. It takes a lot of risk management. We're certainly there to help our companies, but we have to be realistic. So the more we work in Canada on the ecosystem, making it inclusive to all companies, and then helping our companies graduate from micro to small to medium to large, the more we will actually have the ability to trade properly.
Right. Thank you very much. Right. I'm very grateful that everyone was engaged for a post-lunch session. I think we did pretty well. So thank you very much.